Hello everyone! In this week's video, I'm going to be drawing an illustration of a character I gave up on. It's getting towards the end of August, and before working on this video, I hadn't finished my personal illustration for the month. For 2024, my goal was to create a personal piece each month, and so far I have been successful. For this month's piece, it's going to be of an original character that some of you have wanted me to talk more about. Before we jump into the video, I do want to say that I've been sick and I am still recovering, so that's why my voice sounds a bit off. I also want to say that this video does contain topics of anxiety and mental health, so if you find these topics kind of off-putting, feel free to skip them. I'll try my best to put timestamps towards the bottom of the description when the topic gets a bit more serious. One more side note, in case you missed it, I launched the pre-order campaign for the Pariah and Mr. Froggy plush. It is available for pre-order until September 6th. After that, they will not be available. We are getting closer to the 100 unit requirement, but still have a ways to go. Thank you so much to all of you who have supported the project so far. Okay, enough side notes, let's jump into drawing. So, like I said in the intro, I needed to finish my personal piece for August. I also needed a video that was a bit on the simpler side because I was going to be working on a second project while working on this video. However, I came down sick, so I was only able to work on this video. I have to delay working on the second project, but thankfully this video is simpler, so I was able to finish the art in time even though I am sick. So as you can see, I'm sketching out the character. This is kind of a revamped version of my OC Elliott. He's periodically appeared in my videos throughout the years, but I've never gone super in-depth into telling you all about him and his story or background. As you might be able to tell by the drawing, Elliott is a mime. For this illustration, I really wanted to lean into the mime or circus aesthetic. I was going to draw multiple versions of Elliott to get me accustomed to this new look, but I kind of just really liked how this sketch looked, so I decided to use it for the final piece. Another thing I'm going to be drawing inspiration from for this piece is Art Nouveau. I feel like I don't have the words to describe it, so I'll flash up some images on screen. I like all the patterns and the detailed designs, and I wanted to try to create a piece that kind of had a similar look. To help me draw the design, I turned on the grid in Clip Studio Paint. I also want things to be very symmetrical, so I'm using the symmetrical ruler. At first, I was trying to make the piece fit an 8x10 canvas. I've been using this size for many of my personal pieces since it works well for prints in my shop. However, when I see a lot of Art Nouveau pieces, the canvas tends to be on the longer side, and this height ratio was just feeling kinda awkward. So I made a new canvas and started over. I dragged in a word balloon with rounded edges to use as a guide. In many of the pieces I was looking at, they have rounded corners for many of the decorative shapes. I kept trying to draw shapes based on my references, but this time I decided to just put them away and draw my own shapes. I tried to let the piece come about more naturally instead of trying to force it, and I kind of played around with the shapes as I went. This canvas size felt a lot better for fitting the piece. I like that I can include the entire top hat without the piece feeling awkward. I find that whenever I try to draw characters of top hats in illustrations, I have to crop the picture and not show all of the top hat because it just extends too far above the character's head, but in this case the extra height works very well. After I had gotten the idea for the shapes in place, I started to do the line art for them. For the shapes on the side, I used a brush that I found to make the diamond shapes. To make things feel more ornate and whimsical, I tried to add swirls to some areas and also tried to add extra shapes wherever there were small gaps in the design. I had tried a few different things, but I couldn't decide on what I wanted to do for the corner shapes. I decided to go in with a brush that has the outline function turned on and kind of just drew a bunch of swirls and dots. It's simple, but I like it, and I feel like it goes with the feeling I am looking for. Once that was all in place, I felt ready to move back to drawing Elliott. I'm going to be working on the line art. I switched over to camera footage since I thought it'd be more interesting. When I was looking at Art Nouveau art, it often had very thin line art on the inside and thicker line art on the outside, so I decided to mimic that look. It was kind of hard since I don't do super thin line art very often, so this resulted in the process taking a bit longer. So let's talk about Elliott and why I'm labeling him as the OC I gave up on. Like I mentioned, Elliott has appeared on my channel a handful of times throughout the years, usually in sketchbook tours or in videos where I'm talking about my OCs. In technicality, there are lots of characters I have given up on. Jade and Topaz are a good example. I drew them and thought about them a lot when I was young, but I wasn't very good at writing stories at the time, so I gave up on writing their story. However, Elliott is different from the other characters I've given up on. Most characters that I stop writing the stories for kind of get forgotten, or they kind of move to the back of my brain, like the archives or something. But with Elliott, he's never really been moved to the archives in my brain, even though I gave up on his story, and I think that's due to my emotional attachment to him. When I think about it, it's kind of funny to say you have an emotional attachment to a character you made up, but I've always described Elliott as the character I created when going through a hard time. So let's go to the beginning. The year was 2016. I would have been 20 at the time. I remember that summer I'd been watching a good amount of America's Got Talent. That season there was a mime that was one of the contestants. And me being me, I thought to myself, I want to make a mime character or a character that doesn't talk. So I whipped out my sketchbook and drew this. To be honest, I was very timid with making Elliott actually look like a mime. He kind of just wore mime-ish looking clothes. The more important part about him, or the part that I wanted to explore, was the fact that he didn't talk. In my early 20s, I was experiencing really bad anxiety. I find myself getting anxiety over things like leaving the house, college work, any form of socializing, birthday parties with extended family, and also just generalized daily anxiety. This was all very hard, but also very isolating since I didn't know how to talk about it with anyone. At times, I felt like I couldn't talk, so this character that also couldn't talk really connected with me. Alongside Elliott, I created Abrielle. This is my only drawing of her. She was supposed to be Elliot's love interest, or kind of the character that moves the story along, since it would be hard to do that with just Elliott. To make Elliott seem more mysterious, he wasn't the main character. We would learn about him through Abrielle. I also have many different versions of Elliott that I drew throughout the years. He goes through changes and tweaks, but he always had really light blonde hair and light blue eyes. I always struggled with him looking kind of like my OC Chase. For this version of Elliott in this illustration, I wanted to actually make him look like a mime and really lean into a circus kind of look, since for some of the versions of Elliott, I considered making him be a circus performer. Younger me didn't really want to make Elliott look too weird or odd looking. I wanted him to appear as more of a male lead in a romance story, if that makes any sense. I'm more okay with making him look odd now, since I find this more artistically interesting. I did also draw his hair on the shorter side, since I figured for his line of work he needs to have his face be very visible, so that's why I gave him the shorter slicked back hair. Also, I did draw him with a very dead expression. That was mostly to make the piece feel a bit off-putting or kind of creepy circus vibes, but in my head he's still very expressive with his face. Now we are going over to the rendering after I filled in the base colors. For the shading, I tried to draw inspiration from my Art Nouveau references. A lot of them had very soft shading that wasn't too harsh, as well as a good amount of gradients. I was taking this into account when shading, but did kind of start doing my own thing as time went on. So back to Elliott's story. I'm going to try to explain the story and all that I remember of it, but I do not remember everything, and I also can't find my original writings. I wish when I was younger that I would have been more protective with my writing material. I can't find a lot of it, and I don't know what happened to it. This version of Elliott's story that I'm going to be telling is the first version. It's the one I wrote the most and gave up on eventually. My brain has made some changes over the years and small tweaks, but I've never written them down or anything. Anyways, like I mentioned, Abrielle was the main character. Also, I did not include her in this video. I probably should have, but she felt so not important that I didn't include her. The star of the story was Elliott. Abrielle was kind of just a plot device. Sorry, Abrielle. Abrielle worked at a fashion boutique, and it was located by the park that Elliott would perform at. One day, Abrielle went to the park, and she was crying for a reason that I don't remember. Elliott saw her and sat next to her, and she vented to him about her problem. After all that, she realized he hadn't said a word the whole time, and that he was a mime. He makes her smile by doing something kind of silly or goofy, and they part ways. Now, I'm going to be honest, I don't know why I was writing this story as a romance story. I think younger me felt like all stories had to be romantic in some way, because that's what I was into and reading at the time. But if I were to write it now, it'd be more of a mystery or drama. Anyways, not long after that, Abrielle came back to the park hoping to see Elliott and thank him for cheering her up. She ends up seeing him performing in the park, and he is surrounded by people and they're all smiling and enjoying his show. Also, if you're wondering how he is making a living as a street performing mime, younger me came up with the idea that he is employed by the city and he is kind of park entertainment as a sort of tourist attraction or something. I don't know, I don't totally remember, but I think that's what I came up with. Once Elliott is done performing, Abrielle comes up to him and thanks him for the other day. Abrielle starts to try to make small talk, but since Elliott doesn't talk, it's kind of difficult. But he grabs out his notepad and a pen to write out answers to her questions. Over the next while, they start to form a friendship. I had written out a bunch of different interactions, but I don't really remember them at this point. So fast forward, Abrielle and Elliott are good friends, and they meet up in the park for lunch on most days. However, this day is different. Elliott seems a bit off, and he's not being very expressive and won't look Abrielle in the eye. Abrielle keeps trying to figure out what's wrong or what's going on, and after a while, Elliott opens his mouth and tries to speak, but nothing comes out. He then dramatically leaves the park, and Abrielle is very confused. She goes back to their meeting spot every day for a couple of weeks. However, Elliott has not been showing up. Now, at this point in the story was when we would learn about Elliott's anxiety and anxiety attacks that revolve around speaking specifically. And so when he tried to talk to Abrielle, it kind of kicked it all back up. Now, the reasoning I had come up with as to why Elliott has this fear is that he was bullied as a kid and young teen for his squeaky voice. He also had an abusive dad that suffered from frequent sound-sensitive migraines. So if Elliott spoke too loud, he got in trouble, to put it lightly. So instead of anxiety, I actually kind of wrote Elliott more with having PTSD symptoms, but I did not know what PTSD was at the time. At this point, I had a good amount of the story written out. When you watch movies, you'll notice that they often follow a pattern, like intro, development, conflict, and resolution. I had written up to the conflict, but now it was time for the resolution, and this is where I got stuck. So around the time that I was writing the conflict, I rewrote that part several times, mostly because it was the most complicated part. I was trying to convey Elliott's struggle with anxiety / kind of PTSD, and also trying to have Abrielle find out about all of this. On top of all of this, I wanted to have Elliott overcome his fear, and that's where I was majorly getting stuck. I kept trying to write how he overcomes his struggles, and at one point I remember thinking, how can I write about a character that overcomes their anxiety when I don't know how to overcome my own? And that thought right there made me give up on the story altogether. I felt like I couldn't write a resolution because I didn't know what the resolution was. Now that I am older and know more, I'm able to think of some steps that Elliott could take to move in the right direction. But I think younger me wanted an easy, quick resolution that made Elliott completely overcome his fear, because that's kind of what I wanted for myself, an easy solution to make the anxiety stop. But that wasn't really realistic. It wasn't realistic for me anyways. It's been a long process of ups and downs over the years to get to where I am now, and my journey of getting to where I am now worked for me, but it would most likely not work for others. Hi, so this is Future Editing Becca. In the next portion, I talk about things that helped me overcome anxiety. I thought about cutting all this out because it's not really related to the art or Elliott, but I decided to keep this portion in just in case it is possibly helpful for someone out there who is maybe going through something similar to what I went through. Also, obviously, I'm not like a psychologist or therapist or anything. This is just stuff that helped me and my experience. So don't take this as professional advice. Things that helped me were, 1, I opened up to my mom about my anxiety. I don't know why I waited so long to tell her. I guess I felt like I didn't want to burden her with my problems. But my mom also deals with anxiety, so she totally understood. Just knowing that someone else knew that this was something I was struggling with helped a lot, because it didn't feel like something I was trying to hide from everyone. Number 2 was exercise and being mindful of thought patterns. This helped a lot for my generalized daily anxiety. Exercise can help promote better brain chemistry, and I even still find that if I'm having a day where I'm feeling more anxious for some reason, a brisk walk or any activity that gets my body working for about half an hour can kind of help take the edge off. It helps me feel more calm and less stressed. Also, being mindful of my thought patterns or thought loops. Sometimes there would be certain thought cycles I would allow myself to get stuck in, and when I noticed that these would often lead me to feeling anxious, I decided I would try to avoid going down those thought cycles, and this is something I still do. And going down random thought cycles isn't me trying to like avoid a problem. If it's a current problem that I actually need to face, I will try to think about it and think of a solution. However, if it's something that's not really like actually a problem, or it's more of just like a hypothetical thing, or I'm kind of over worrying about something for not really a real reason, I'll try to like redirect my thoughts in a different direction. But this one can be really tricky. And sometimes my body's just anxious even though thought-wise I am okay. And so sometimes redirecting thoughts doesn't even really do anything because my body's just reacting, but like my thoughts are okay. But yeah, exercise and trying to be mindful of thoughts has always kind of helped me. Number 3 was eventually I saw a doctor and they prescribed me medication. When I went to the doctor's appointment, my heart rate was really high when they took it. The doctor asked me some questions and decided to prescribe me with a beta blocker. Now, a beta blocker isn't technically an anxiety medication. It is a medication that affects the heart rate and circulation. It is used to treat various conditions such as angina, hypertension, migraine, and also anxiety. The most simple way I can explain it is that it lowers your heart rate. People will use it before public speaking or performances to help them be more calm. When I saw the doctor, I had gotten to the point where I wasn't experiencing daily generalized anxiety. I was only experiencing anxiety for things like social events and appointments. So he felt like this was the best fit. And honestly, I've only used the medication twice, and it was prescribed to me like 4 years ago. But just knowing I have it as an option helps me a lot, because a part of my fear was not just socializing. It was, what if I have an anxiety attack while at a social event? The fear of having an attack added another level of anxiety, but knowing that I have a medication with me to help me if I need it makes me not fear the possibility of an attack as much. So that's been helpful. The last one is I've kind of learned to live alongside it instead of trying to reject it. I always hated the phrase, sometimes you just have to do things scared. I hated it so much because I felt like the phrase didn't understand how scared I was. Like, no, I don't want to do things scared. I want to do them not scared like everyone else. But at the same time, anxiety is a very normal human emotion, and you will experience it. And sometimes you do just have to do things scared, because doing something you fear is so scary at first. Like, absolutely terrifying, but the more you do it, the more familiar you become with it, and the less scary it becomes. Like, ordering my own food at a restaurant used to make me so nervous, but now that I've done it a lot more because I go out to eat with my husband, it doesn't make me nervous. But if it is a new restaurant, I look at the menu beforehand so that I know what I'm going to order before I go there. My anxiety fears the unknown, so making the unknown known makes things become less scary over time. So yeah, sorry for the long tangent, but I hope that maybe it's helpful to someone out there. I had the feeling this video would get kind of more on the serious side because of Elliott and his story and the kind of reasoning as to why I made him. Sorry it was more serious. If you're new, I promise not all my videos are like this. They're usually really lighthearted, but I hope you still enjoyed the video. For the finishing details of the art, I wanted to make it look like a worn out poster kind of look. So I used different filters to give it a texture and also added some ripped textures to it. And so here's my finished art of Elliott. It was fun taking inspiration from Art Nouveau as well as from circuses. It was really fun revisiting his character, especially since I haven't drawn him in so long. And it was also kind of fun revisiting his story, and I finally got to tell you all about him. Before we end, I want to thank my super awesome YouTube members and Patreon patrons for their support. It means so much to me. And thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next week in my next video. Bye!